If you want to support these projects, head over to mulliganbrothers.com, where you can now buy the Inspire Change t-shirts and much, much more. And please consider becoming a YouTube member with the join button down below. Before that, let's jump into the highlights. Childhood, growing up, what was it like?
I grew up in rural Maine and spent most of my childhood running around outside and playing in the great outdoors. I grew up with my parents and my sister and had a pretty happy, normal childhood. I had good friends. School was okay. I didn't love school, but otherwise, nothing spectacular in terms of any incredible hardships or difficulties or anything like that. Life was pretty easy, pretty simple, and pretty fun.
Just for someone from the UK, what was Maine like growing up?
So Maine is pretty cold in the winter, long winters too, and dark. And so we do things like snowmobiling and ice skating and ice fishing. For a lot of the year, the summers seem really short. From June to August, it's warm, but it doesn't get super hot usually. And it's pretty rural. We have more trees, more cows than we do people. Not a lot of highways or stores, that sort of a thing. So it's a pretty rural area with lots of outdoor space and plenty of parks and places to run around outside when you're a kid.
Okay, so then going into school, what was the plan going into school? Did you have a passion for the career you're in now, or did it just kind of develop over time?
So as a kid, I thought for sure I was going to be a doctor. That was my plan for most of my life, was to go to med school. But on my first day of college, we had to dissect cats. And almost everybody in the room was excited about it except for me. And it occurred to me that perhaps I'm not actually interested in being a doctor. I just like the idea of being a doctor. So I called my sister and I said, hey, I need to change my major. What do you suggest? She was a psychology major. So I said, I'm thinking psychology. And she said, why don't you go into social work? Because then you at least get a degree and you can get a license when you're done. A bachelor's degree in psychology, sometimes it's tough to find a job. And so I said, all right, social work, that sounds good. And I didn't even really know what a social worker did. I just knew I didn't want to be a doctor anymore in that one moment. So we switched my major that day, and I became a social worker. Thinking, all right, I'll probably change my major later on, but fell in love with the idea of social work, and then went on to get my master's degree in social work as well, and decided that that was really my calling. It wasn't to work on the body. I was much more interested in working on the mind anyway.
And what was the early career like once you got into it?
When I first started working as a social worker, I worked at a mental health agency where I worked mostly with children. And so it would be kids who were struggling with depression, anxiety, behavior problems. Some of them had a trauma history. Some kids were abused, neglected. Others were just teenagers who were maybe struggling with peer issues at school, bullying. And so my career was mostly sitting in an office, talking to kids and their parents one-on-one, and doing therapy on a regular basis.
Okay, and so, I mean, I've seen the TED Talk, and I've watched a lot of interviews, and what led to writing the book was quite a tough portion of your life, and I'm really interested just to hear sort of how you led from doing the social work up until the point where you decided to write the book, like what triggered you to write the book and come up with this system, or these 13 things that people don't do.
So initially in my career, I thought, okay, I'm going to teach people what I know about mental strength based on what I learned in college. The things that came out of a textbook are going to be what I teach people. But pretty early on in my career, everything changed. My mother passed away suddenly, and I was invested in mental strength on a more personal level. I wanted to know, why do some people go through tough times and they come out on the other side feeling like they've grown from it, like they've learned from it? And other people go through tough times and they feel like they got stuck, like life could just never be that good again. And as a therapist, it was like I had a revolving door of case studies in my office every single day. People came through and I could look at them and say, okay, well, what does this person do that might be different from what other people are doing? What helps them to stay optimistic? How are they still hopeful despite everything they've been through? And I realized it wasn't always about what they did. Sometimes it was more about what people didn't do. That people who went through tough times and didn't have certain bad habits seemed to get through it relatively unscathed. in a way, they went through the pain, but they seemed to be able to come out on the other side feeling like they were stronger because of that pain that they endured. And so as I studied these people, I quickly figured out, okay, these certain bad habits are what are keeping people stuck. And so I started applying it to my own life, but also talked more about it in the therapy office. And it was the 3-year anniversary of the day that my mom died, when my 26-year-old husband died of a heart attack. And when you're 26, you're not supposed to have a heart attack. And I was convinced I wasn't supposed to be a widow, but here I was. I woke up one day and I don't have my mom, I don't have my husband, and I'm supposed to be a therapist who helps other people. And I was certainly not in any shape to help other people with their problems in that moment. But thankfully, I had learned a lot, and I had learned, okay, when you're going through tough times, it's okay to feel all the pain. You have to experience all those uncomfortable emotions, but just don't do these certain bad habits that are so tempting to do when we're in a rough spot. So I worked really, really hard. It took years in order to figure out, okay, who am I going to be now? What kind of life do I want to live? And if this is the hand I was dealt, what sort of life do I want to create for myself? And I had a new job, I got a different house, and I found love again. I got remarried, and life was looking pretty good at first, but then my father-in-law got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And unlike when I'd lost my mom and my husband, this time I knew what was coming. I knew that we had a matter of months probably before my father-in-law passed away. And I was thinking, oh, I can't do this again. I can't grieve. I've just grieved for so long. I don't want to do this. But obviously it wasn't like I had a choice. And so I sat down and I wrote a letter to myself about what mentally strong people don't do. And it was all of those things that I had learned over the years about the bad habits that keep us stuck. And when I was done, I had a list of 13 things. And I would read that letter to myself, and I found it helpful. So I thought, if this helps me, maybe it could help someone else. So I put it on the internet thinking maybe 5 people would read it, hoping it might help one person. But 50 million people read that list. And one of the people who read it was a literary agent, and she called me and she said, you should write a book. But people who read the list didn't know the context behind it. It was literally just the list. They had no idea that I was a therapist who was struggling with these things. So I told her, I don't know if I can tell the whole story because I don't want to lose my credibility as a therapist. If people know I struggle with these really basic things, it might be really hard for me in my career. But she encouraged me. She said, you don't have to do it, but maybe that would also give you more credibility. So I decided to go ahead and write the book. So my book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, came out the following year, where I described the science behind those unhealthy habits and how they tend to keep us stuck and why we're so likely to engage in them, especially when we're in a painful place in our lives.
Okay, so one of the first places I want to start then with that is the initial feeling of grief. Like I used to call it like a deep dark well, like the bottom of it. How do you cope and deal with that part of it?
Our tendency when we're grieving is to try to go around the pain. Grief feels awful, and we try to distract ourselves. We try to get as busy with anything we can. People try to cheer us up. Other people are uncomfortable looking at us in pain, so people want us to be happy. They go to great lengths to try to distract us as well. But you have to allow yourself to feel all of those awful feelings, and it's confusing to our brains because it's such a jumbled mixture of emotions. Our brain is trying to process the loss, trying to figure out, okay, this is permanent, because sometimes we're just waiting. Like we think, okay, next week things will get better, or we're just waiting for our loved one to magically appear again so we can have a conversation and explain what we're going through. And it takes a while for our brains to figure out, okay, this is permanent. And so we feel this mixture of anger and sadness and just deep sorrow mixed in with confusion and uncertainty and anxiety and fear. But you have to let yourself go through it. And when we grieve too, sometimes we can't just grieve all at once because it's too much for us. So it kind of comes in waves. There'll be moments where you might smile or you laugh for a second, and then you feel guilty that you could dare possibly be happy for a second. But just allowing yourself to to experience all of that and to try to put a name to some of the emotions when you have them, to say, okay, I'm really anxious right now. Just labeling those emotions can go a long way toward helping sort it out and help your brain figure out what's going on in your body and what's going on in the world.
If you enjoyed the video, please consider going to mulliganbrothers.com, where you can now buy the new Inspire Change t-shirts, the LFG t-shirts, the Hardest Worker in the Room t-shirts. Everybody who's been supporting us has made this project possible, and projects like this in the future possible. We cannot fly all around the world with our film crew and ourselves and do these interviews and documentaries without your support. So thank you very much. The support has been amazing and we appreciate it. Also, there is a join button down below where you can consider becoming a YouTube member of this channel by hitting that join button. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to follow us on the behind the scenes stuff of our editor, at Niamh Mulligan, X on Instagram, or at Jordan Mulligan Brother for myself on Instagram as well, you can see what we get up to on a day-to-day basis. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed and productive day. Go inspire some change, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.